Many people assume if they hit seven figures, they're ready to retire. But one family that we've been working with had 1.45 million at age 58, and they still didn't know if they could afford to spend $10,000 a month or if that dream would leave them broke in their 70s. They had worked for decades in a demanding sales job, and they were finally ready for some more freedom, but they didn't know if that lifestyle was financially responsible. Online calculators gave them wildly different answers, and fear started to replace their excitement about retirement. I've helped dozens of clients navigate this exact fork in the road. And so in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how I helped this client to figure out how they could retire now with the life that they wanted. So let's get right into it. So let me introduce you to Tim and Sue. Not the real names, but a real couple that we've worked with. They're both 58. And after decades in sales management, Tim built up just over $1.4 million across his 401ks and his IRAs and his other investment accounts. And they lived pretty modestly over the years, smart with money, rarely splurged, always saving for the future. But now they're starting to think seriously about what that future looks like. What they really want is to retire early and start living a little more purposefully. So think more travel, better dining, maybe a more active lifestyle to the tune of about $10,000 a month, but they're stuck. They've run the numbers on every retirement calculator they can find online, and each one gives them a completely different answer. One says they're fine. The next one says they're going to run out of money at 75 years old. So now they're left second guessing everything. Do they have enough money to retire? Can they really afford to start spending money without jeopardizing their long-term security? And that uncertainty that a lot of people have, it's paralyzing, right? They're excited to enjoy life, but then they're terrified about outliving their money potentially. And this is where the emotional toll sets in. Tim is still grinding in a high-pressure sales job, feeling burnt out, while Sue's already stepped away from her job and she's ready to start the next chapter of her life. But they're stuck, not because they don't want to retire, but because they're not sure it's safe. And every day they wait, they're losing time that they may never get back. You see, they're caught between two powerful forces: that desire to retire early and finally have that work-free lifestyle, and the harsh reality of needing the money to last potentially 30 plus years without having another paycheck coming in from work. So if any of this sounds familiar, and you're unsure if you can actually retire now and live on $10,000 a month like them, click the link below in my video description. And my team and I, we put together a free training that shows you exactly how to figure out how much you can safely spend in retirement and how to turn that savings into that steady, reliable monthly income without the guesswork. So be sure to check that out. So what is the impact of all this? Tim is still stuck in a demanding sales job, and every day he keeps going back to work. He wonders if he's working longer than he really needs to. Is he putting off the life that he's earned for no good reason? But without real clarity on whether their accumulated savings can actually support that $10,000 a month lifestyle, they just can't make the leap. And that lack of confidence is what's keeping them in this state of limbo. So now that you've seen kind of how it's affecting Tim and Sue, this next part is really important because it's about showing you exactly what they saw when they walked through their numbers. And we walked through them together, and really how that process helped them to finally get clarity on their retirement. So here's what we shared. Just some quick traditional planning numbers to get some rough idea. So we took their $1.45 million and we applied a 4.5% withdrawal rate, and that gives us about $65,000 a year. Then we looked at their future Social Security. So Tim is projected to get about $3,900 a month at 67, Sue around $2,300. And if you add that in, now we're approaching their $120,000 goal. And here's the thing. Once you factor in taxes, their real target, it's closer to about $135,000 a year. So on paper, the numbers, they're close. And that's encouraging, but close isn't the same thing as confident. And that's where there are still some big question marks that we needed to answer before they could make any decisions. But here's what that basic calculation doesn't tell us. And these are the things that really matter. So first off, we used Social Security estimates based on claiming at 67. But what if they want to retire now at 58 and maybe start their benefits earlier at 62? Well, those numbers are going to be lower than what we just looked at. And then there's the healthcare gap. They're going to need to cover their own insurance for 7 years until Medicare kicks in at 65, and that's no small expense. We also haven't factored in the tax impact based on how their money is saved. Pulling from 401ks, IRAs, or taxable accounts, it all hits differently. And what happens if one of them needs long-term care down the road? A simple 4.5% withdrawal calculation doesn't answer any of that. And to truly believe in your plan, those wild cards have to be accounted for. So we also need to go beyond the back of the napkin math and see what modeling software actually tells us about sustaining a $120,000 lifestyle from $1.45 million over 30 plus years. It's not just about percentages. The software is going to give us a full picture of how everything fits together. And more importantly, how the plan stands up against real threats like market downturns or higher than expected expenses. And then there's the withdrawal strategy itself, right? We need to decide how we're going to withdraw our savings in a way that gives us the best chance of making the money last, especially in the face of those sequence of returns risk that you might have heard about. And of course, we have to plan for the bumps. What happens if the market drops early on in retirement? How much flexibility do they have to be able to adjust their spending and stay on track? And all of these questions feed directly into that modeling process. So let's take a look at what Tim and Sue saw when we ran the numbers and we went through the software, and let's look at how it helped them to get real clarity on their retirement. So after entering all their savings and Social Security and the goal of retiring at 58, we see an outline of what the income might look like. And here we see the $120,000 income grossed up for taxes. So that's about $135,000. And we can see the yellow represents the money that they're going to be pulling from their portfolio. And then later we see the darker shows us when the Social Security begins and it reduces the amount that's being pulled from the portfolio. Now, as we analyze this, we look at the actual withdrawal rate. Remember when we did that quick math earlier using the 4.5%, and this is why that rule of thumb is not gospel, right? This 8% withdrawal here shown kind of scares me a bit because it could work, but we don't like could when it comes to something so important. So we're going to need to mitigate that risk. That can be accomplished in different ways. But the main goal is to reduce the risk during those years. So we can bucket some of that money so that it's less risky, or we can use a guardrail strategy to monitor those years specifically. A decision like this is going to be really case by case. But let me show you why this is so crucial. Because when we look at the confidence, we see that sometimes the plan makes it to age 88, sometimes longer, and sometimes they're out of money in their early 70s. And we can't have that. And I've said this in many other videos, but this is only helpful up to a certain point, because what we're missing here is how to know what path you're on as you go through retirement. That's something that you can solve through something like our modern guardrail strategy, and I'll comment more on that later, but let's put a pin in that for now. And that confidence level is connected to this probability dial. Here again, I've talked at length about the problem of probability dials for actual retirement, and the main reason is that they don't communicate well to retirees. But you can imagine, what it is helpful for here is to show you that Tim and Sue did not feel great about 45%. So I tell them, we want to shoot for 80%, not 100%. And then once you've achieved that and you actually retire, we're not going to let the probability dial into the conversation again. And the reason for that is that our withdrawal plan is going to involve allowing the percentage to fluctuate. So we're going to have a target of 80%, but we're going to give them room for that to change. And this is how we're going to manage that question of what do we do when the market's down? We're going to set a guardrail above and below that 80% mark. And that drawdown, when it happens, because it will, we're going to use that lower guardrail to tell us if the risk is too high and if we need to either cut back spending for a period or use money from another bucket. So they understand that the goal is not 100%, it's 80%. And they understand that it's okay to let that fluctuate after they retire. But there's still a glaring problem. Not only is their plan showing 45%, but this plan is not does not have a bridge for that healthcare gap between the ages 58 and 65, nor does it include any solution for if one of them has a long-term custodial care need. So here's what we do. We need to prioritize and set those goals aside a bit because we need to get this plan to 80%. And after that, we can talk about how those other two items have been left out and how to address those. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make the spending more true to life. So when Tim and Sue said they wanted to spend $10,000 per month, a lot of times what happens is people add up all of their expenses and they combine their healthcare and their mortgage and their vacations into that number. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, your mortgage will probably get paid off at some point, and that's going to reduce your needs. Also, you're not going to vacation every year for the rest of your life, so we're going to separate that out. And your healthcare, it's going to inflate at a different rate than your living expenses, so it would be best to separate that out as well. So let's make that adjustment. So you're seeing the $8,000 retirement monthly expense here. And we've been talking about $10,000, and it's actually $10,000. What happened here is the housing costs and the healthcare costs have been taken out of this number because they show up in another place. So just trust me here, it's $10,000. That's where you're getting the $120,000 lifestyle from. Now, we've separated the vacations into two different time periods, larger vacations at ages 59 to 68 and smaller ones from 68 onward. And we have them stop in their mid-70s. And they want to spend $6,000 vacations early on and $3,000 vacations later. Now, this means that I can reduce that monthly spending goal by $500 per month because we were accounting for the vacation money in that $10,000 number. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make that spending goal a little bit more accurate so that the plan isn't over preparing for spending. So let's make that $7,500. Now, while we're at it, we're going to adjust that spending to happen more naturally. Now, most retirement planning software default to what's called inflation adjusted. And that means the system is assuming that your lifestyle spending goals are going to really stay the same and they're going to increase by inflation every single year. But that's not what studies show. And that's not what we've seen people really spend money in retirement like. It's more like a spending smile. You spend more earlier on and a little bit less as time goes on. And then the spending increases again towards the end of life for additional healthcare needs. And this setting here will reduce the spending by about 1% per year, which is about half of what the studies show really happens. Because studies show it's about 2 to 2.5%. And this is only going to be on their lifestyle goals, not on their healthcare or any of the other goals. And I'm going to hit refresh here and see what it says. So just by making those clarifications, they're looking better, but still not great. So Tim's curious about the timing of his Social Security benefits. And he was planning on waiting until his age 67. She was going to claim at 62. And since we have their Social Security benefits entered into the modeling software, we can play these little different situations a little bit and see if there's going to be a difference that it makes. What if Tim claims at 62 instead of 67? Well, not much of a change. And what if he waits until he's 70? Nope, not much of a change there either. So that doesn't mean that Social Security isn't a crucial part for some plans, but believe me, we've seen many plans where the timing was very significant to the plan. When we get to this point, we walk Tim and Sue through why Social Security timing isn't just a one-size-fits-all decision. For example, if they both live into their 90s, delaying benefits could significantly boost their lifetime income. So waiting starts to look a little bit more attractive. However, on the other hand, if their investment strategy is really conservative, that's going to impact how much growth they can expect from their portfolio, which also shifts the Social Security conversation. It's all connected, and that's why timing matters more than most people realize. For Tim and Sue, the Social Security decision really comes down to personal preference. How long do they think they're going to live, and how do they plan to invest? Whether they claim at 62 or wait until 67, the overall impact on their plan is pretty minimal based on what we're seeing here. That said, I do make sure that they understand one important piece. The timing does affect how much of their income comes from Social Security each month as opposed to investments. And for some people, that added peace of mind really matters. Okay, so what else can they do to get their plan closer to 80%? Well, I'll tell you what they're not going to do. We're not going to target a higher return because they're already targeting an 8% return. And unless they tell me they have some kind of health concern, we're not going to reduce their planning time horizon. Right now, we're planning to her age 90 and his age 82. So what can Tim and Sue actually do to move their plan closer to that 80% confidence level? Well, there are a few trade-offs that they should consider, and one obvious lever is spending. We can adjust the numbers and show them exactly how their different spending levels would impact their plan and try to get them closer to 80%. If they haven't already done the needs, wants, and wishes exercise, I'd have them go through that too, because it's a great way to get clear on what's essential, what's flexible, and where they might feel comfortable making some adjustments. Or they can retire at 58 and work part-time for a few years. And that's something that we can model in there for them. And all of this is in service of helping them to explore the trade-offs that every retiree faces. And we haven't forgotten about those two big missing pieces, the healthcare gap from age 58 to 65 and the long-term risk of higher medical or custodial care costs that could happen later on. So these are critical parts of the plan, and this is where we walk Tim and Sue through their options. For that healthcare gap, they might bridge that with part-time work. Maybe they have an expected inheritance, a bonus, or maybe there's even some assets that we haven't accounted for yet. As for long-term care, there are several routes: self-insuring, purchasing traditional long-term care insurance, or even leveraging home equity down the line. The right approach is going to look different for everyone, and that's exactly the kind of conversation that we want to have so that we can make the plan realistic and personalized. So when you bring all of these questions, these decisions, and the potential solutions together, Tim and Sue, they're finally in a position to make informed choices, not guesses. And they've got a plan that they understand. Most importantly, a plan that they can believe in, the confidence to move forward with clarity. So now you've seen how we break down whether $1.45 million can support retiring at 58 with a $10,000 a month lifestyle. You're in a better position to evaluate your own early retirement options. And if you want more help figuring this out for yourself, check out my free training video in the description below. It's going to show you exactly how to determine whether early retirement is truly possible and how to build a plan that gives you confidence in your income and your desired lifestyle. Be sure to check that out in the description. Click the link to get started. I'll see you in the next video.